Well, hello there to everyone in Mrs. McNamee's class. My name is... Wait a minute. I can't give you my name. I'm a mystery reader. Anyway, I'll give you a clue. I know someone in your classroom, and it's not Mrs. McNamee. Anyway, I'm here to read one of my favorite books. And if you look over here for a minute, you can see in my backyard that I have lots of bird feeders because I love birds. And I feed them because they need some help eating during the year, and because they're fun to watch and they're fun to hear. They're chirping and different kinds of sounds. There are 10,000 different kinds of birds in the world. And they're beautiful colors. So lots of people like me are bird watchers and bird feeders. Now, that leads us to my favorite book, which is about birds, even though the title is Those Darn Squirrels. You can probably figure out what's going to happen here. Anyway, Those Darn Squirrels is a great book by Adam Rubin, and it's illustrated by Daniel Salieri. And as I said, it's one of my favorite books because of what it's about, and it's also kind of funny. And it's also about an old man like myself. So I'm going to read it. Those Darn Squirrels. Here's an introductory page with a picture of pictures of birds. And these birds have all been painted by a man who's sort of the hero of our story, who loves birds and loves to paint birds so that he can look at them when they're not around. And here he is. He lives over there. On the outskirts of town, at the edge of the forest, there was a little old house. The only thing older than that little old house was the man who lived in it, Old Man Fuquire. Now, Old Man Fuquire was so old that when he sneezed, dust came out of his nose and mouth. I guess that is old. He was also sort of grumpy. He hated pie. As you can see, he's throwing it in the trash. Who doesn't like pie? I love pie. I had more than a half a pie yesterday for breakfast. He hated puppies. Who in the world does not love puppy dogs? Now, there was one thing that Mr. Fuquire liked. It was the only thing he liked. Birds. All summer long in his backyard, Old Man Fuquire painted pictures of the birds that visited his house. There were whirly birds and bonga birds and baba birds and yaba birds. Even a rare occasional fluga bird came by once in a while. Fuquire's paintings were not very good. They didn't really look much like the birds that you and I are used to seeing. But the birds never said anything. I guess they just liked having their pictures painted. Now, when the air turned crisp and the leaves began to turn color, I bet you know what time of year that is. It's fall, autumn, and the old man grew sad. He knew that soon the birds would fly south for the winter, as they did every year, and that he would be lonely. Then he had an idea. If he fed the birds, maybe they'd stick around. So Old Man Fuquire began building beautiful bird feeders, and he put them up all over his backyard. Way more than I have. He filled the feeders with delicious seeds and berries, which are two of the favorite things in the diet of birds. And soon the birds came from all over the forest and the fields near his house and farther away, just to eat in the old man's yard. But the birds were not the only ones who liked bird feeders. And you probably know this from your neighborhood too. The squirrels like the bird feeders also. Now, not many people know this, but squirrels are the cleverest of the woodland creatures. In fact, some people call them fuzzy little geniuses. They can make a house out of a tree. They can make a bed out of a bunch of leaves. And they can make a box, kite, out of twigs and dirt and squirrel spit. Although I must tell you, I have never seen a squirrel kite in my life. They're also excellent at math, and you can see down here they're doing their addition and subtraction on this old abacus. Well, winter was fast approaching, and the squirrels needed to gather as much food as they could to get ready, because it's harder to find nuts and berries and seeds or any kind of food outdoors when the snow's on the ground. So the squirrels decided to take some of that bird food. You can see they climbed up a tree and they found a way to lower the bird feeders or to break them open so that the seeds and berries would dribble down into the mouth of a hungry squirrel. The birds, needless to say, were not happy, and neither was Old Man Fuquire, who had gone to a lot of trouble to feed his friends. When he discovered what had happened, he shook his old man fist and he yelled, "Those darn squirrels!" Yeah. Well, he went out and filled up the feeders again. But this time, he hung them on a clothesline from one pole to the other, and he climbed up a ladder and filled them up very carefully, and then he went back inside his house, and he was confident that the squirrels would no longer be able to get to those seeds and berries. Little geniuses. The squirrels were determined. They devised a plan, and this time they took all of the food from the bird feeders. How'd they do it? They all climbed up this tree. The tree was so heavy with all these squirrels on it that it bent over. And the squirrels would drop down and get the bird seed out of the bird feeder that was hanging from the clothesline. Gee. The birds were furious. "Harumph, harumph," they yelled. The bonga bird said, "Darn you." And Old Man Fuquire yelled, "Those darn squirrels." And the squirrels, they just laid there with their big full tummies and said, "Yum. Those darn squirrels." Mr. Fuquire at his most outraged. Well, now it was the old man's turn to devise a plan. He went to the general store, which is like a hardware store, to get supplies. He bought lasers and clamps. He bought wires and springs. He bought all sorts of tools, and he built a veritable fortress around his bird feeders. And then he refilled the feeders carefully. Let's look at some of the things he did in his attempt to keep the squirrels away. First, he built a moat. Do you know what a moat is? It's like a little river or a stream that you build around your house or your castle in the old days to keep out invaders. Fuquire built a moat. He put up barbed wire fencing, which is extremely sharp and prickly. He put these cans here. I'm not exactly sure what they did, but I think if a squirrel tripped over one, it would make noise rattling around, and it would alert Mr. Fuquire that something was going on. He put up a security camera so that he could have video on all night and day, and he could see what was going on in his backyard. And he had traps of all kinds. Like this, he had mouse traps. Any squirrel unfortunate enough to step in that is going to end up with a sore leg. And over here, a delicious piece of cake. All you have to do is step inside this little rope, and when it sets off the trap, you're caught. Or at least a squirrel is caught. Pretty high price to pay for a bite of cake. Well, the squirrels stayed up all night working out a strategy to be able to get to this food. They drank cherry cola. They ate salt and vinegar potato chips. Those are both my favorites to help them stay awake. And finally, they had the perfect plan. It's all diagrammed right here. Drop a big rock here. Catapult the squirrel through the air, past some of the traps, over to the food. But would it work? They put on their tiny helmets and they prepared to launch themselves into the air, over the fence, between the lasers, and onto the bird feeders. They were like daredevil squirrels, squirrel cannonballs. Well, the first squirrel misfired, and whap, landed right up against the side of a tree. The second squirrel went too high and came down in a bucket of paint. And the third squirrel, they fired him too hard, and he sailed clear over the house and was never seen again. The birds laughed and laughed. They each had one last delicious mouthful of seeds and berries from the old man's feeders, and then they took off and flew south for the winter, just as they did every year. And as the flugel bird turned away and looked at the squirrels, he said, After the birds left, old man Fuquire was lonely, just as he was every year. He went into the kitchen and he made himself some cottage cheese with pepper. It was his favorite snack, and I suggest you try it. But he was still lonely, and when he looked out the window, oh, look at that cardinal over there. And when he looked out the window, the squirrels could tell that he wasn't very happy. "Go away," shouted the old man over here in his kitchen. "I don't like you squirrels." The squirrels held a meeting deep inside a large tree. They put out a sign, "Squirrel meeting tonight," to make sure all of the squirrels knew that they had to go in and discuss this problem. They decided to give the old man a present to make up for taking his seeds and berries. They felt bad that they had made him feel bad. Now, not many people know this, but squirrels are not only fuzzy little geniuses, they also collect just about everything they find on the ground, like a little person that I know. These squirrels had a vast stockpile of spectacular junk to choose from. But what would Fuquire like? Bottle caps, popsicle sticks, postage stamps, a key, a pencil sharpener, an earring, a feather on a rope, a pendant, a pencil, a Band-Aid, a little red car like my friend's, a toothbrush, a button, a paperclip. Boy, they were junk collectors. But what would be the what would be the perfect gift? Finally, they had it. The squirrels took all of their loose money, their change, and they put it in a stack on the doorstep of Mr. Fuquire's house. There were dimes and pennies. There were nickels and quarters. There were some Kennedy half-dollars even, and silver dollars. There were even a few tokens from Coco's Arcade. You know, those kinds of tokens that mean you get a free game. And it all added up to $47.36, plus a few rounds of skee-ball. Well, maybe you squirrels aren't so bad after all, Fuquire said when he found the coins and the gifts. But I still like birds better. Well, that gave the squirrels another idea. They raided their junk collection again and they got to work. And when old man Fuquire woke up the next morning, he was amazed to see that the birds had returned. But wait, those things weren't birds. They were squirrels in disguise. "Great googly moogly," said old man Fuquire. "This will make quite a painting." He ran outside and he took down the lasers and the wires and the spring-loaded trapeze, and he turned all of the bird feeders into squirrel feeders. And then he painted and painted pictures of the squirrels dressed up like birds until he ran out of paint and bristles on his brushes. Do they look like birds to you? Actually, they kind of do, when they have masks and make-believe wings and birthday party hats on their noses. Yikes. The squirrels were so overjoyed that they had a party in old man Fuquire's house. This time, Mr. Fuquire said, "Those darn squirrels!" But when he said it and he shook his fist, he was smiling because he and the squirrels were finally friends. And that's the end of the tale of those darn squirrels. Now, if you guys like to feed birds, you don't have to buy big bird feeders like these, or you don't have to make them like Mr. Fuquire. You can just do this. Take a pine cone and roll it in a dish of honey, which is nice and sticky, and then roll it in a dish of birdseed, which will stick to the honey, and then hang it up in a tree. And it might take the birds 1 or 2 days to find a new feeder, but I'll tell you, they'll be there and they'll be loving that bird food. But you know who else will? Those darn squirrels. The end.